Today we're going to be talking about resiliency from our farms to our communities and to ourselves. I'm Rylan Engelhart, and I'm one of the co-founders and the executive director of Kiss the Ground, a nonprofit that is inspiring participation in global soil regeneration. And I'm also one of the owners of Cafe Gratitude and Gracias Madre. And yeah, I just real honored to be here with you all. Today we have a friend, Dr. Mark Hyman, who is the founder and director of the UltraWellness Center. He's also the head of strategy and innovation of the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, on New York Times bestselling author. His latest book is called The Food Fix. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be spoken about and touched on in that book. So beautiful. Welcome, Mark. I just want to say, just as where we personally became, we conference kind of paired dinner event at a conference, and no relatedness in the beginning, obviously, and by the end, we had just, from my perspective, there was a deep love and appreciation and adoration and inspiration for each other. True. And it's so really, really grateful to be here with you. And yeah, and now Mark is, he's an advisor to Kiss the Ground, and also is one of the spokespeople in the film due to come out that is called Kiss the Ground. So thank you again, Mark, for being here with us.
Yeah, no, I remember that dinner very well, and I remember the deep conversation. I remember the connection between soil and health, and the background I had around agriculture when I was in college studying soil and health, and that book by Sir Albert Howard, that famous quote, which is the whole problem of health in soil, plant, animal, and man is one great subject. And you talked about Kiss the Ground then, and I was so excited. I got the book and I devoured it, and it just really got me inspired to actually really dig deeper into the story. And that's really what led to ultimately writing the book called Food Fix.
Wow, so cool.
You were there.
And reading the definition of resilience, which is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. So clearly, as a species, as a planet, we are in a very interesting and critical time. The capacity to recover quickly from difficulties seems like a pretty important subject that we're all wanting to understand, and how we can do it at an individual level, as well as how we can do that at more of a collective level. So just to set some context, in order for any system to be healthy, our bodies, an ecosystem, a business, you name it, it has to be able to bounce back, recover, and regenerate. In other words, a system is healthy if it is resilient and can change during adversity. From farms, communities, to our own bodies, let's talk about the concept of resilience and how it needs to be the front and center of this now moment. So, Mark, at a high level, what is the current state of our collective health, looking at our farms, communities, and our bodies right now?
Well, it's not resilient. I come at this from the perspective of a doctor, and particularly a doctor focused on functional medicine, which is all about resilience. It's really about understanding how to create health as opposed to treat disease, whether it's in humans or soil. It's the same thing. In fact, I actually, I call it ecosystem medicine, which is really a method of thinking about how do we create a healthy system as opposed to just treat the symptoms. So it's one interconnected thing that we have to be focused on. And I'm not sure if you froze here, Ryan. Ryland, are you there still? Uh-oh. I think you might have frozen.
I'm having a little bit of interruption as
Yeah.
well.
My
I'm going to
bandwidth
check
is
my.
my bandwidth is super high, so I don't know if it's me. I just checked it, so it might be yours coming in and out.
Okay, just going to check one thing.
Everybody can hear me, so I'm just going to keep going. You try to fix your bandwidth.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think
think
we're
that
good.
yeah, I think that the whole idea of resilience is such an essential concept in any aspect. It's particularly right now as we're all facing COVID-19. We're all under a lot of stress. We're all trying to figure out how do we not get it? How do we protect our families? How do we create resilience in our own life in the midst of this, crisis and stress? So the whole idea of resilience is that it's a resilience in the face of stress, right? So if you look at a monocrop cornfield or soybean field, it's not very resilient. You get one corn beetle in there or one hailstorm and boom, you're dead. The crop's over. If you look at a rainforest, it's a complex adaptive system where if one species goes out, it's okay. There's redundancies, there's resiliency. It's a robust, healthy system. And our health today is not robust because of the ultra processed food that we're eating that's made in an agricultural system that's actually producing that food. So the food itself is harming us, and the way we produce the food is harming the environment and the climate. And so it's this continuous loop we live in. We don't just live in isolation from farms. I mean, we used to have probably, I think 80% of people in the 1800s were farmers in America, and now it's about 2%. And so we've really kind of lost the connection with our food and with our source of our food and the connection to our food and the understanding of the importance of the quality of our food. And that's really driven this just great destabilization. And as we're seeing now with COVID-19, the people who are the most susceptible are the ones who are chronically ill. And most people who are chronically ill with heart disease, diabetes, for example, is one of the biggest risk factors for death, cancer, and so forth. These diseases are diseases that are produced by the poor quality diet that we have. The chronic disease epidemic that affects 6 out of 10 Americans, which is sort of against the background of 75% of us are overweight and 42% obese, which is just staggering, right? I mean, just to put in perspective, when I was born, 5% obesity was the rate. When I graduated medical school, it was far less than 20%. Now it's 42%. And I think that is, we're seeing a threefold increase in deaths among people who are obese who have COVID-19. So this is putting to really real perspective the effect of this poor quality diet created by a poor quality agricultural system that's creating poor quality health, that's creating incredible susceptibility to harmful effects of COVID-19. And that's what's sort of terrifying me, is that we have such an unhealthy population. And that's where we're going to see more risk. If you're overall healthy, people usually do okay. They have low grade symptoms or mild symptoms, 80% do. But for the 20% that are not healthy who get it, it's really quite a problem. And I think that speaks to the whole underlying need to build resilience in all of our systems, build resilience in our health. Yeah.
One quick question. From your perspective, what is the big distinction between a COVID-19 and kind of your run-of-the-mill flu that's, affecting people all the time? And also,
a couple of things. One is, although flu strains do mutate from year to year, there is a high level of immunity in the population, and there's also a relatively high level of vaccination, and that may or may not be perfectly effective. It doesn't prevent all cases of flu, but it keeps a level that's relatively low, and it's also much less lethal. So, while 40 million people get the flu and 40,000 die every year, again, it's mostly the ill or sick or have those with chronic disease. The death rate is about 0.1%. And when you look at COVID-19, depending on populations you look at, for over 80 years old, it's 15%. For people with heart disease, it's 10%. For people with diabetes, it's 7%, which is dramatically higher than 0.1%. It has a terrible effect on the lungs, and it goes to a pneumonia that often leads to the need for ventilators and even results in death. So it's a higher mortality. It's not as high, I think, as it's being portrayed, because in order to know the real death rate, you need to know the real infection rate. And the only place that has tested the real infection rate is South Korea. They've done over 10,000 tests a day. They got it very early. They didn't do social distancing because they were really aggressive. As soon as they heard about it in China, they developed a test. It was 98% accurate. They got everybody tested. So they knew the real case rate. And the death rate there was probably 0.5%, maybe 0.8%, maybe less. And that's a little bit more than the flu, but it's still not what we're seeing today in a lot of the news. So I think it is a much more serious infection. We don't have native immunity. It's spreading like wildfire throughout the population. I mean, I try not to look at it, but, I wrote an article, a week ago, and there were 4,000 people with COVID-19 in America. Today, a week later, there's like 60,000 people with COVID-19. And if you look at the rise, it's like a hockey stick exponential rise. And that's what worries me. And that's what I think the social distancing is important as a way of sort of slowing the virus spread and preventing the overburdening of our healthcare system, which is also not so resilient because it's so overburdened with chronic disease. Yes, and Michael said 0.5% is still 5 times as lethal as the flu. You're absolutely right, Michael. That's right. So I think it is much more lethal. I think we have to be very serious and cautious about it. But I think the thing we can do is build resilience in our cells. So functional medicine is about building biological resilience.
Yeah, that's kind of where we wanted to go today, is looking at how do we, literally from the ground up, how do we build resilience? And obviously, as you know, Kiss the Ground, myself, are very passionate about healthy soil being a place to start. But I'd love to just get your perspective from a doctor's perspective. How is regenerative agriculture and focusing on soil health a great place to start for solving or creating resilience in the human body?
Well, like I said, the quote from Sir Albert Howard says it all. It's the whole problem of health in soil, plant, animal, and human is one great subject. So the truth is, you cannot create a healthy human without healthy soil, period. And the reason is that the nutrients in the soil are the only source for the nutrients for the plant. So if the soil is depleted, the plant will be depleted. And we know today, for example, that even if you're eating at Cafe Gratitude and you're getting the best vegetables, it still may be 50% less nutritious than it was 50 years ago because of the depletion of our soil. And the way that works is that if you have live living soil, which is rich in microbiology, which is rich in mycorrhizal fungi, which is rich in all these incredible life forms that are essential for extracting the nutrients and letting the plants consume them. If you're growing stuff in depleted dirt as opposed to rich soil, the plants are not going to be as nutritious, even if it's your best broccoli. So I think it's really important to understand that's key. And then the second part is the majority of agriculture, 70% of agriculture, is growing food for animals, for human consumption, which is a terrible idea because, one, you're using up all this cropland, you're deforesting the Brazilian rainforest to grow crops for corn and soy for animal production. You're using really terrible methods of agriculture that deplete the soil, that use intensive fertilizer production, that use intensive herbicide and pesticide production, that use lots of antibiotics in the production. And it just creates this incredible cascade of negative, harmful effects on the planet through driving climate change and driving water resource depletion and driving incredible devastation to waterways, to the nitrogen runoff and the pesticide harm and the glyphosate harm to humans. So I could go on and on about this. It could be like a 5-hour conversation. But all these downstream effects are from the way we're growing food, mostly these monocrop soy and corn fields and also wheat. And these 3 crops, corn, wheat, and soy, other than cotton, are the main crops that are supported by our government. They're grown in ways that are harmful to the soil and produce food that's harmful to humans. They're the raw materials for ultra-processed food, basically what we call junk food, but it's 60% of our calories. So 6 out of 10 of our calories come from these crops And these crops are so harmful to us because when they're processed in the way they are, if you eat a wheat berry, it's fine. If you eat a corn on the cob, it's fine. If you eat a soybean, it's fine. But if you process them in the ways we do, making them into high fructose corn syrup, refined soybean oil, white flour, and you turn that into hundreds of thousands of industrial food products that are not really food, it drives huge amounts of harm in the human population. And it kills 11 million people every year around the world. That's a lot of people. I mean, we're concerned about COVID, and we should be, but 2,300 people die every year just from preventable heart disease caused by the ultra-processed food we're eating. And nobody's saying we should have a national emergency to deal with that. And I think we need to sort of reorient our priorities to understand that once this passes, we have to deal with this bigger issue of this industrial processed food that's grown in a way that's harming humans, harming the environment, and harming the climate.
And so just why because there is many causes of death that creates death for many individuals every year, what do you see from your view of why has this become such a it seems like it's the most important thing on the planet right now, and well, it maybe should be. I'm just wondering why you think it has such a large emphasis more than anything else that we've ever seen.
You mean COVID-19, or you mean?
Yes, COVID-19.
Well, I think it's the acute versus a chronic problem, right? So it's like if you look at a frog and you drop him in boiling water, he'll jump right out, right? That's COVID-19. If you drop a frog in water and you turn the heat up slowly and you boil it, it'll boil to death. That's chronic disease. So when you look at the graph of COVID-19 and you look at the graph from 1980 of chronic disease and obesity, it's the same graph. It looks the same. It's a hockey stick, but it's a very slow hockey stick over 40 years as opposed to over 3 weeks, 4 days, right? So I think that's the problem is we aren't attuned to chronic problems, and they just sort of slowly creep up on us, but they're overwhelming our system. They're overwhelming our healthcare system. They're overwhelming our economy. They're creating untold suffering, and the food system is the biggest driver of climate change, period. And I think people don't realize that. It's also the biggest cure. And that's why the work you're doing at Kiss the Ground is so important, because it speaks to how we can actually solve this problem. And the biggest problem is also the biggest solution.
Yes, I completely agree. That's really what I've given my life to, because I really, up until the moment of discovering soil's importance in our human health as well as in our planetary health, and that we could rebuild it relatively quickly, I didn't see a way that we could actually live generations in the future. But having that insight really was the thing that gave me hope. So let's see. I have a couple. Let's see. Many of us are under chronic stress. How is that? Because obviously there's the input of food, but talk about stress, because stress, obviously, when we're talking about the resilience of land, when we're tilling our land and putting chemicals on our land, that's causing stress and degeneration to our land. But talk a little bit about the stress and that's impact on human health.
Yeah, well, we're all experiencing it now, aren't we? And I literally have to do what everybody else has to do, because I'm a human and I'm affected by this like everybody else. And I'm sequestered in my home up in the Massachusetts area with my wife and trying to figure out how to run my practice virtually and how to adapt to this situation. And so, I for the first bit, it definitely was challenging. I was having trouble sleeping, and now I've sort of gotten to a routine. So today I woke up and meditated and sit with my wife, and we have a little moment where we connect and deal with the stress by just sharing what's up below. We just really listen for each other, and we're just feeling that human connection. And then I just before this, I did like a half an hour of yoga, and I meditated for 20 minutes. And I do that, and I'm eating really good food, and I'm trying to connect with people I love. So we all have to figure out in our own way how we can actually use this time to actually nourish ourselves physically, emotionally, spiritually, and help each other, because, you know, the one thing about this problem is it erases all the divisiveness in our society. Everybody's in this together. We're all the same. We're all can be affected, whether you're Prince Charles or whether you're, you know, a Republican senator or whether you're whatever you are that has got the virus. It's touching everybody, and I think we're all connected. And I think that that's actually an important thing to realize. We're in this human condition together, and maybe it will help us to sort of reorient ourselves after this in a different form of thinking and solidarity as a human species in a race to actually solve some of our biggest problems together, because we're all working to solve this together. People are social distancing. People are working to actually solve these problems together. And we need that kind of a, you know, Manhattan Project for chronic disease and for the earth and for climate and for soil. So I think you're working on it. So I'm just so honored that I get to hang out with you and talk to you. You're doing God's work.
Mm-hmm. Likewise. Beautiful. So let's see. We've covered. So yeah, let's talk about. You know, most people are concerned about. You know, I think to have human resilience is to have a strong immune system. What are you? How are you recommending people to, at a practical level, in their homes, boost their immune system beyond just kind of the idea of, you know, eating healthy food, but talk a little bit about how, you know, what toolkit, what you're recommending for people to boost their immune system, so that they can be resilient in this time.
Yeah, well, I wrote a blog about it, an article. You can just go to Hyman, Google Hyman and COVID, and it'll pop up, and it's how to protect yourself and support your immune system. And it's really the common sense things that we all know. And the good news is, by eating in the way I recommend, you're also helping the planet and reducing climate change. And if there is a silver lining to this whole thing, I mean, we're definitely reducing our emissions right now. So nobody's traveling, nobody's going anywhere. So it starts with food. If you're eating food that is bad for the planet, you're eating food that's bad for you, that's the first place to start. And I think that the default is people are eating comfort foods. People are eating sugar and starch and processed food and packaged foods. That is the worst thing you could be doing right now. Why? Because sugar affects us terribly. It drives our immune system down. And so when your immune system's suppressed, you're more likely to be susceptible. And that's why we're seeing threefold increases in obesity-related deaths from COVID-19. So I think it's really important to cut out all the ultra processed food. It's good for you. It's good for the planet. Second, eat a lot of nutrient dense foods, lots of vegetables, colorful fruits and vegetables. You want to make sure you're using lots of spices, oregano, cumin, cilantro, you know, rosemary is a great one. Olive leaf extract is great. Olive oil, a really good olive oil is good. All these have antiviral, antimicrobial properties, ginger, garlic, turmeric. I made a dal tonight, which is lots of turmeric and spices that are antimicrobial and boost your immune system. So lots of spices. Eat good quality protein, because if you actually look at how your immune system works, it runs on protein. And most of the deaths in the developing world from infectious disease are because of protein malnutrition. Now, Americans don't suffer from that terribly, but there are people who are protein deficient, especially the elderly, and sometimes kids and people who are on limited incomes, and so there's real challenges around that. I think it's also important that, you know, people start to learn to cook. This is an amazing opportunity to actually be at home and cook. We've been cooking every night. Simple food. It doesn't have to be expensive or difficult. I made something called pasta Puttanesca, which was the whore's pasta, which is very inexpensive. Only the prostitutes could afford that. And it's basically anchovies, capers, olives, tomato sauce, garlic, olive oil, onions, and you throw some. I actually use chickpea pasta because it's got a little extra protein, more nutrient dense. And it's just a real nice comfort food. It's delicious. Tonight, making dal and rice and broccoli rabe and some mushrooms, you know, just really simple foods that are nourishing. And I think I encourage people to get back in the kitchen. I've got lots of resources, cookbooks, recipes on my website. There's lots of, you can Google any recipe. And even if you don't know how to cook, Google YouTube on how to actually cook whatever you want to cook. It's always something out there you can learn from. So I think that's number one. I think, so food is really critical. The second is, you know, Rhythm. Get in a rhythm in your life and build a structure. So sleep, meditate, exercise, eat, build a structure, because a lot of our structures are gone, and it can be easy to be aimless or watch Netflix all day or be chaotic. And I think it's important we thrive on rhythm, go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time. Why? Because it's really good for your immune system. And then and develop a practice of gratitude. I think of gratitude for the things that we are grateful for. So my wife and every night we do a little gratitude practice where we say, what we're grateful for, and what we really care about, and it really helps remind us of the things that matter. I think exercise also is really important for your immune system. Not like over exercising, don't go run a marathon, but making sure you're moving your body, taking a walk, getting outside, getting some sunlight and fresh air, as long as you're away from people. Sometimes in the city it's hard to do that.
A couple of things I wanted to just throw in there was I did two days ago. I made this huge batch of cream of tomato soup, and I had the thought while I was making it, this idea of soup for your neighbor. And so I thought, okay, hashtag soup for your neighbor. And while we're home, let's learn to express our culinary arts and make some food. And obviously we could soup preserves vegetables that are gonna go bad and over time gonna rot in our refrigerator. So making a big batch of soup and leaving it on the doorstep of a neighbor, ringing the doorbell and just leaving a little love note and saying, soup for your neighbor, I love you, pass it on.
You can make a big pot of chicken soup. I mean, I got organic chicken. I mean, and it's so unbelievably delicious. We've been eating it for like 4 or 5 days. You could literally give it to friends. It's great for your immune system. There is actually data on chicken soup being good for your immune system. So an organic chicken, I put in onions, parsnips, carrots, small potatoes, ginger, garlic, black peppers, and just I actually put in some special things. I put in some cloves and the Chinese 5-star spices,
Mm-hmm.
and it just creates it's like this great broth, and it's so nourishing, and it just lasts forever. And I think it probably costs 50 cents a bowl. We put in some Bhutanese rice to make it a little more hearty.
Someone's asking the question that you had just touched on, just around immune system's connection to protein, and just to give us a little bit more dive into the understanding that.
So immunoglobulins. So the things that your immune system uses to fight infection are proteins, right? So if you are low in protein, you can't make the immunoglobulins, the antibodies that fight infection. You can't make the cytokines that help you fight infection. So there's a real, huge body of data on protein malnutrition in the developing world. So when a kid, for example, in India who's malnourished gets measles, they're likely to die. Or if they get diarrhea, people die from diarrhea. Little kids die from diarrhea. Why would they die from diarrhea? Because they can't fight the infection. And I think in this country we don't see that as much, but in certain populations it's there, in the sick, in the elderly, in the young, people on certain low protein diets. It can be a thing. So it's important to make sure you have plant-based protein, animal-based protein, whatever your beliefs allow. But it's important to make sure you have adequate protein with every meal, making sure you're having really high nutrient-dense foods and very low amounts of starch and sugar, and no processed food. Yeah. And then, of course, there's some other things people can do. I think vitamin D, zinc, vitamin C. I think those are really sensible probiotics. There's reasonable data on all these, not necessarily for COVID-19, but for other coronaviruses, because it's a family. And there was work done a lot on SARS-CoV-1. This is SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus, but they're similar in nature. And these might also be effective. Quercetin, naringenin is like from the skin of oranges. Quercetin comes from onions, and so these are really powerful nutrients that can help your immune system. There's a lot of other things that people are throwing around, but those are real simple, basic suggestions.
Beautiful. Let's see some other questions.
Somebody, Maria said, I aim for 8.8 per 8 grams per pound. It's 0.8 grams per kilogram. Right. So if 1 gram per pound is too much. So if you're eating 1 gram per pound, if you're 200 pounds, that's 200 grams. It's too much protein. So you need about 0.8 to 1.2 grams per kilo. If you're sicker, you may need more, because when you're fighting something, you need a lot more protein. So if you're sick, make sure you have enough protein. It can be, up to 1.2 grams or 1.5 grams per kilo.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. Mark, what's your awareness on the vaccine topic for COVID-19? And what's your kind of understanding or belief system around the vaccine conversation with, like flus in general? Like, do you recommend that?
Yeah, so flu vaccine, as long as it's a single dose vial, which doesn't have mercury, because the multi-dose vials have mercury, can be helpful, specifically in populations that are at high risk. And it's not 100% effective, right? It's not. But it may be 50%, 60% effective, depends on the season. So I think it's an important disease control measure. I think COVID-19, we just don't know. It could be 16, 12, 18 months, 2 years. It needs testing. It's not without risk. So I am concerned about getting control of this. I did want to address Virginia. She asked a question, which I think is fair, which is, how do you talk about climate change and eating meat in the same breath? Animal agriculture is one of the driving forces of climate change. How do you address that? Absolutely. And I think you're right. And I didn't say it before, but conventional animal agriculture, factory farming is one of the most destructive forces on the planet. Destructive for the animals, destructive for the climate, for the environment, humans. It's just bad all the way around. It should be banned 100%. But Ryland's work and the work of Kiss the Ground is really about regenerative agriculture, and is a method of growing food that is regenerating the earth, regenerating soil, reversing climate change, protecting the environment, increasing biodiversity, reducing water use. And it uses very specific practices, cover crops, crop rotations, no tilling, limited or no use of chemicals. And it incorporates animals into the mix, because one of the things that we know scientifically, and you might not like this fact, but it is a fact, that animals are critical to generating soil and regenerating soil. It's how we got 50 to 80 feet of topsoil in some areas in America, was the bison. There were 60 million ruminants, bison. There were tens of millions of other ruminants chewing and grazing and moving around in mobs that actually built this soil, and they were not causing climate change. They were actually regenerating it. And I think there's a lot of data using life cycle analysis for regenerative ranches and farms that actually integrating animals into a diverse ecosystem farm actually helps to reverse climate change. It actually is better, for example, than eating an Impossible burger, which still is better than a factory farm burger, but still adds 3.5 kilos of carbon for every Impossible burger, whereas a regenerative burger reduces it by 3.5 kilos. So we just have to be honest about, what the science shows and the importance of regenerative agriculture. In fact, the UN said that if we took 2 million of the 5 million degraded hectares of land around the world that's been destroyed through destructive agriculture, through overgrazing and so forth, if we took that and we converted to regenerative agriculture, and it would cost about $300 billion, which sounds like a lot, but it doesn't sound like much compared to the $2 trillion package we just passed. It's basically less than the amount of money we spend on diabetes in this country through Medicare alone, right? Just Medicare, right? The total cost of diabetes and obesity in this country is about 3.7 trillion. So it's a fraction of that. If we did that, we could stop climate change for 20 years. Like, that's staggering data from the UN.
Was this the data that was in that Time magazine article that said we could halt climate change for 300 billion?
Yes, that was the referencing the UN report. And I think we definitely should ban factory farming of animals, period, no comment. No question about it. But that doesn't mean that all animal agriculture is bad. In fact, 40% of agricultural land is only suitable for grazing and can only be used for raising animals. And if it's done in a regenerative way, is a powerful way to restore the environment, to reverse climate change, and to upcycle nutrients into high quality food for humans that otherwise we couldn't eat. So I think it's a challenging conversation, because I think people have beliefs about this, and I think you've managed to thread that needle, Ryland, talking about regenerative agriculture. Obviously, your background as being a vegan. I was a vegetarian for 10 years, so I understand the moral and ethical issues. I just think from the environment and climate issues, we have to understand how to build resilient ecosystems, and one of the ways is using regenerative agriculture.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. It's, to me, it's the one thing that's scalable. Having animals grazing on land that's not suitable for growing crops can help regenerate that land that ultimately is in a state, a degrading cycle of desertification, and
Yeah.
with animals having their impact on it, and their poop and pee can actually create a really, really quite a quick turnaround, and regenerating that land back from a desert to, or desertified to, grassland that has quite a bit of coverage. So,
And people think about methane. I just think, I think in the cows, and I think, there's a lot of data on how, using regenerative agriculture actually can sequester the methane through these methanotrope bacteria that are in the soil. That's a whole other conversation. But
yeah,
what people don't realize is that, if you're eating vegetables and soy and corn and all these, these foods that we're eating that are using fertilizer, which, I mean, we use about, I think it's about 400 million pounds of fertilizer around the world. The fertilizer is produced using an energy intensive process. It's about 2% of all global energy use. And the fertilizer, when it's made, most of the energy used for making fertilizer comes from fracking. And it produces 40 to 50% more methane than conventional oil wells, and it far exceeds cow farts and burps in producing methane. And then you're fertilizing plants, and so you could be eating soy and corn and wheat and be a vegan and still actually contributing to climate change through this effect. And then of course when it goes on the soil, it creates nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And then it runs off in the rivers, streams, and lakes and creates dead zones everywhere in the world. The one in Gulf of Mexico is the size of New Jersey and kills off 212,000 metric tons of fish every year. And there's 400 of those around the world. So it's a very complicated story. It's not so much as meat, no meat, vegetables, no vegetables. It's how. The best line I ever heard, it's not the cow, it's the how.
Gabe Brown.
And I would also say it's not the broccoli, it's the how, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How is it produced?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
It's not your tofu, right? It's not the tofu, it's the it's the how. It doesn't rhyme with
that was what happened at Be Love Farm. We started growing vegetables for our organic vegan restaurants, and then we were learning how to fertilize them, asking other organic farmers. And where we started to find our fertilizer was coming from manure, which was coming from a confined animal feedlot.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's so funny. Yeah,
and
I was at the Brooklyn Grange, which is the largest rooftop farm, I think, in the country, in Brooklyn. And they're growing all these organic vegetables, this beautiful rooftop farm. We had this beautiful dinner there and yoga and everything. And I was like, so take me on a tour of the farm. How do you create the soil on the farm? And they were like, well, what do you use to fertilize? Well, we'll use bone meal. We use oyster shells. I'm like, oh, so your broccoli is a carnivore, And I think we just have to kind of realize what we're in an ecological cycle, and for better or worse, that's how life works. I mean, even people don't realize that just agriculture itself is an inherently destructive act. You're destroying wild habitats of animals. So if you create this beautiful organic farm and you plow, 20 acres, you're destroying all that habitat. And estimates have been done through research that you could, by just using plant agriculture, we're killing 7 billion animals a year, whether they're mice or rodents or bunnies or birds or insects. That's a lot of animals. So whatever you're eating, you're in the cycle of life, whether you like it or not. It's just the fact of life. And so you might be not doing it intentionally. It's a byproduct of actually the agriculture. But if you really wanted to be pure, you just have to be a forager, like just go out and forage, and then you'll be all right. But that's not, most people aren't going to do that.
Quick question. Is this true from your science understanding that all calcium it's only been alchemized through the creation of a living organism? Like there's no calcium only was created through the structure of a living organism. Like
that's interesting, like shells and things like that.
Yeah, that calcium only was metabolized from the environment as a body of a shell or an exoskeleton was actually created. And that's the only
That's
source.
interesting. I don't know the answer to that, but that's fascinating. It may be true.
Someone told me that. I thought maybe.
Yeah.
Excellent. Let's see. We have some questions here. Ruminants need to be integrated. Yes. Bobby.
They wanted me to repeat the Impossible Burger. So basically, the Impossible Burger is GMO soy. So if you look at a factory farm, it produces about 30 kilos of carbon dioxide for every burger you eat. Impossible Burger will produce about 3.5 kilos. A regenerative burger takes out 3.5 kilos from the environment. So you'd literally have to eat one Impossible Burger to offset the carbon emissions of an Impossible Burger. That's basically what the science is showing. And then people are going to argue about it, whether the science was good or not. But it's basically, just kind of a fascinating insight.
Wow, that is. So is that from the White Oaks study?
White Oaks Pasteur. It was the same company, Qantas, that did the life cycle analysis. So the same company analyzing both systems. And, the truth is, we should be eating more plant foods. No argument. That's what I've been saying for decades. But Impossible Burger is not a whole food. It's a weird industrial food-like product, and it's made in a factory. And I think, some things are made in a factory, like a can of tomatoes or a can of sardines. That's okay. But this is a very strange product that has 47 novel ingredients, that has more glyphosate than is needed to kill your microbiome. In fact, there's 110 times as much glyphosate in every Impossible Burger than is required to destroy your microbiome in animal studies. So that makes me worried, particularly in the face of COVID-19, where we all need healthy microbiomes, and we shouldn't be eating anything that's going to destroy them, because that's where our immune system is.
Wow, that's a great point. So talk a little bit about microbiome, how it connects to our immune system, and even at some point thread it to the microbiome or the biology of soil.
Yeah, well, we're one organism, right? Humans, plants, animal, and so, the microbiome of the soil is what we've killed. And we've also killed the microbiome of our own bodies through antibiotics, C-sections, processed food, lack of fiber, glyphosate, you name it. All these gut busting drugs, acid blockers that we take for having heartburn, for eating junk food. So all these things destroy our internal ecosystem. And the microbiome, for those who are listening and don't know what that is, essentially it's probably the most important organ in your body, it turns out. We used to thought it was just called poop, but it turns out there's 10 times as many bacterial cells as your own cells. There's 100 times as much bacterial DNA as your own DNA. Probably half or more of the metabolites in your blood are from microbes. They all interact with your body to do different things. And if there's bad bugs, they create bad health. If there's good bugs, they create good health. And that's why we should be really learning how to tend our inner gardens through eating a whole foods, plant-rich diet, through eating lots of fiber, fermented foods, and also making sure we don't eat all the junk that's causing them to be abnormal. And the reason that, your gut's so important is because most diseases of aging, most chronic illnesses are inflammation diseases. And the gut is where 60% of your immune system is. When your gut's messed up, it's causing systemic inflammation. We know that your microbiome, if it's off, can cause heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity, autoimmune disease, asthma, autism, allergies. I mean, the list goes on. And I think depression even. I don't mean to go to the psychiatrist and say, how's your poop? We probably should. So I think that this is really an unexplored area. It's an area of tremendous research. Now it's exploding. But in functional medicine, we've been doing this for a long time, which is teaching people how to get their guts healthy using food and using a whole program we call in functional medicine called the 5R program, which is how to restore your gut ecosystem. It's actually what we do. So like you work on restoring soil ecosystems and soil microbiology, we restore the gut. And it's so critical, and it's so connected to the health of the soil, because if you're growing foods that are depleted, if you're growing the wrong foods like we do in this country, you're going to be destroying your microbiome and you're going to create this vicious cycle. So just going back to that quote from Sir Robert Howard, the health of soil, humans, animals, plants, it's all one thing.
And as far as just like an opportunity to put a new practice into place in the face of COVID-19, as far as strengthening our microbiome, is there a kind of protocol or a few things, top 2 to 3 things that you recommend for rebuilding that ecosystem?
So the first thing I would say is you want to remove. So we actually call it the 5R program. It's actually a methodology we use. First, to remove things that are irritants that are not good. So number 1, you remove inflammatory foods, processed food, and actually gluten and dairy tend to be really problematic. Mostly the gluten in this country is grown in ways that make it worse. There's more gliadin, there's more starch. It's sprayed with glyphosate, which destroys your microbiome. It's got calcium propionate, which causes all kinds of gut issues. So, gluten and dairy is a great way to avoiding those. It's a great way to start. Eating a whole foods diet. I've written a program called the 10-Day Reset, which is really a way of rebooting your system, rebooting your gut. You can get it free at getpharmacy.com. That's with an F, GETPharmacy.com, and download the guide on how to do it. That's a great way to start it. Also, it's really important, I think, for people to know now that doing these things is more critical than ever, because we're home, we can take care of ourselves better, we can cook, and it's time to really reset our health, because the more resilient, going back to our conversation at the beginning, the more resilient we are, the more we're likely to resist the infection and stay healthy. So the second part, and sometimes the remove also means taking herbs or sometimes even medications to kill bad bugs that have taken up residence in there, parasites. Then we replace things that are missing, whether it's enzymes, prebiotics. We eat a lot of prebiotic foods, plantains, artichokes. You can get a prebiotic, for example, rice. If you cook rice and then you put it in the fridge, becomes a prebiotic food or resistant starch that helps your gut microbiome. And then fermented foods and so forth. And then we re-inoculate. We use probiotics, whether they're probiotic foods like kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and they can be coconut yogurt or whatever. Those all help to restore the gut. And then the last is to repair, which is to include nutrients that really help repair your gut. Things like zinc and fish oil and vitamin A, things like glutamine, which is an amino acid. And the last is to sort of restore, which is to restore your nervous system, reduce the stress, and actually doing things like meditation, because your gut and brain are completely connected. So it's really a comprehensive program, and it really is powerful. And I think it's really quite simple to do, and I think people should definitely do it this time.
Beautiful, thank you. One thing, in the world of this moment where there's so much storytelling of what is true and what's fact and who to listen to, one thing that's been kind of recirculating in my world of understanding and is just this whole idea of electrification, and that the world, there's more electromagnetic EMFs all around us, through cell phones, through cell phone towers, 5G, and that there's that's the cause of a lot of deteriorating health. And I'm curious, from a scientific doctor's perspective, where are you standing? Where do you understand about, I know Rudolf Steiner said that there was, right before the Spanish flu, a few years before that, was the introduction of the radio waves, where radio waves started basically, circulating the planet. And there was some pointing to that connection. And I'm just curious if you have any understanding or do you see any truth to that a lot of our dysfunctional health is coming from electrification that's, happening on the planet? I mean,
I think we're electromagnetic beings, as a doctor. I mean, basically there's the way we make energy in our cells is something called the electron transport chain. It's an electromagnetic field that we are constantly using to create energy. Our heart is electrical, our brains are electrical. So we are not immune from electromagnetic radiation. We know that. question is, what degree does it affect our health, and what degree does 5G or Wi-Fi or cell phone affect us? And I think we're still learning, and I think there's plenty of data out there that's concerning. I try to reduce it as much as possible in my house. You can turn off the Wi-Fi at night. I never put my phone by my head. My wife was a little worried about it, so we got one of these meters to look at the EMF, electromagnetic frequencies in our home in New York City. It was so high, it said extreme. It was 5. The number was 5. And when I put it close to my phone like this, it went to 5,000. And I was like, whoa. And that was like, avoid it. And then we bought this basically tent, like a Faraday cage, to go over our bed. And you go inside there, you can't make a cell phone call. You can't get on Wi-Fi. You can't watch Netflix because it blocks all the EMF. So, I know for me, when I'm traveling and I go camping, for example, I just sleep better. I feel better. But to put in perspective, I think food is far and away orders of magnitude more important in terms of our health than the EMF. So I think it's an issue, but I just want to put it in perspective. There was a woman who talked about, from Lynn, talked about critics of regenerative agriculture saying we can't feed the world. If you hear that sentence, we need industrial agriculture to feed the world, just think Monsanto. They invented that. That's been their mantra. And the truth is that's not true. If you look at all the land that's degraded, all the land that is used to grow crops for animals, all the land that is, unsuitable for doing anything else in this country alone, according to Ellen Williams, who's a regenerative PhD, rancher and expert, we basically kill about 29 million cows a year in America. We could actually do almost 59 million if we took all the conservation land, the degraded land that we have in the Bureau of Land Management, the soil the land we're using to grow soy and corn. If we turned all that over, we could literally produce almost double the amount of cows through regenerative agriculture. So I think it's actually not true. When you talk to a guy like Gabe Brown, he says, I produce more food, better food. I make more money than my neighbor doing regenerative farming. So this is just a myth. It means the changing of agriculture to a more local, more decentralized, different type of farming. And the fact that you're doing this work is so important, training young farmers to come in, getting people excited about this. That's what needs to happen, because right now, the way we're doing it is a disaster, and it's gonna be the end of us.
Yes, I agree. Let's see. There's a Q&A section. There's one question that kind of ties to what you're just talking about, which you said the food system is the largest driver of climate change. Can you elaborate here? Where are you getting these statistics from?
What was the question?
You said that the food system is the largest driver of climate change.
Yeah. So actually, if you want to check it out, read this book. It's called The Great Climate Robbery, and there's a great graph in here. I can show it here, which talks about all the farming systems that are impacting climate change. And essentially it's deforestation, it's soil damage, and soil erosion. If you look at just soil erosion alone, 30 to 40% of all the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere today, which is about 1 trillion tons, about 300 to 400 billion tons, comes from the loss of carbon in the soil and the erosion of soil. So you have the soil tillage, you have the erosion, you have deforestation, you have food waste, you have transport, refrigeration, and you have all the things that are really driving the problem. And if we don't address this as a totality, we're going to be missing this. So all those things are playing a role. And yes, probably factory farm animals is about 14-15%. But when you add all these other things, deforestation is 15%, food waste is 4 or 5%. You just add all these things up, it adds up to about 44 to 57% of all greenhouse gases being caused by the food system from end to end. I think that's really important for people to understand that. So people focus on one aspect of it, but it's all of it, right? Food waste. I mean, that's something we have control over, but food waste for a country, it would be the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases after the US and China, because when you throw it in landfills, even if you're a vegetarian or vegan, you throw it in a landfill, it rots, that causes methane production and is a big contributor to methane and greenhouse gases.
Beautiful. We had a couple emailed in questions about children. So as obesity increases in American children, how do we accelerate the movement to school gardens where they learn both real food, but also understand where it comes from? Too many children in my area go to school with a bag of chips and soda for breakfast.
For sure. For sure. I think, there are a lot of people working on this. I just had dinner with Alice Waters, who created the Edible Schoolyard. There's Kimball Musk, who has his initiative called Big Green. There's something called the Food Corps, like like Peace Corps, Food Corps. It's going around schools. It's not happening enough. It's certainly happening. And if you're a mother or a father or a parent and you want to get involved in your school, it's really important, because schools are often local and regional. And so I think it's really important for us to focus on how do we be activists where we can and where we can make a difference. And I think that's one area we can do it.
One more emailed in question, which is kind of a controversial question. Do you think that the coronavirus was developed in a lab?
I'm trying to stay away from conspiracy theories. I have no idea.
Okay.
But someone said something really great, which was Victory Gardens, and that was Annie built. And people don't know this, but 40% of the food during World War II was grown in Victory Gardens, where people were encouraged to have gardens at home. And we have a garden here. We're going to expand our garden this year. We're not going anywhere. And I'm very excited to grow more food. And whether it's just having a pot of herbs on your windowsill, if you live in an apartment, I have this friend who lives on a boat. He basically created a raised bed garden on his boat. I think apartment in New York City, they had rooftop gardens. I think there's ways to do this wherever you are. There's community gardens in the Bronx. Karen Washington is building community gardens in South Central LA. You've got Ron Finley creating, gangster gardener, creating food forests instead of food deserts. So I think more people who get into growing their own food, particularly because people are worried about our food supply. They're worried about everything. So this might be the year where we get everybody growing gardens and get your kids growing food. They're at home. So why don't you have them learn about biology by growing a garden and learning how to create a little regenerative garden on your thing. And if you want to learn, get inspired, just watch the movie Biggest Little Farm, and also Kiss the Ground, which I don't think is available yet, right?
The film is not available yet. Actually, they just posted in the comments, we made a film with Ron Finley and Rosario Dawson called Regenerative Victory Garden, and it showed you 5 steps to creating.
Oh wow, I want to see that.
A regenerative victory garden.
Here it is.
And actually the way
I see that. Okay.
The way that Kiss the Ground actually began was what began in my living room with friends gathering to see how we could share and transform our food system to a regenerative food system, and how would we get that message out there. And the first thing we thought of was actually to put a little victory garden right here in Venice, California. And we actually set up a small little victory garden. This was probably 6.5 years ago in Venice. And that was actually where we rooted the first Kiss the Ground space and shared what we were up to the Venice
so
community.
Great. It's so great.
Where was that audio coming from?
I actually clicked on the video because I had my browsers all shut down, and I clicked on your video because I want to watch it, and something popped up. But couple more questions just to wrap it up. I have to 6 o'clock. I have to go. Unfortunately, I have another Zoom call.
Okay.
But I love this. I would do it again. We should keep the conversation going. There's a million questions that we need to talk about, and we should do a bigger event, and I can get out there ahead of time in a bigger way. And I'm just so honored to be talking to you about this, Rylan, and telling the world about regenerative agriculture, your work, and how to keep themselves healthy in the middle of coronavirus.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Really a true honor. I love and appreciate you, Mark. And
love you guys too.
Wisdom. Have an
Okay.
amazing rest of your night.
Okay. Thank
Be
you.
well. Bye. All right. Wow. Thank you, everyone, for joining me in my first public Zoom conversation with Dr. Mark Hyman. I know there was lots of questions that didn't get answered, and I apologize about that. It was kind of my first time navigating my questions, the Q&A, and the comments. And so, yeah, thank you for, thanks for your patience with this new modality of sharing that we're all starting to learn how to share love and information through the internet as we all are staying at home more. And I think I'm going to tune out, and thank you again. And again, I apologize if we didn't get to answer your questions, but be well, and do something sweet for your neighbor. And as Mark said, spend time being grateful. I think that is a really, really important thing in this moment. Feeding ourselves well, but really recognizing what we do have, even in this time where we don't have certain things, we still do have many things, and that human beings have an unlimited capacity to be grateful if we look for the reasons and look for the things that we have. So thank you. Signing off. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening.